Maureen, I want to know the first time that you recognized that you had some gifts that maybe weren't like everybody else's.
Well, I think when I really started noticing it was probably age 10, but when I think about it, probably even further back.
Yeah.
I remember actually probably being around 7, where I just kept thinking about space travel and finding different ways to travel with no time and no space. So it wasn't, I don't know if it was really intuitive, but I remember really looking at alternative ways to even think about traveling and so forth. It felt more like, you could say otherworldly.
Yeah. So you're 7 years old and you're thinking about the space-time continuum? Is that what you're
Yes.
telling me?
Oh, yeah.
Oh my gosh. Did you talk to anybody about that?
I don't remember talking to anybody about it, but when I was 10, I did.
Yeah.
But I didn't talk about that.
Okay, so
My 7-year-old mind, I was seeing almost like a little thing in the wall where you could type in, like punch in an address, and then you'd sit there and it would just automatically take you there,
Wow.
wherever you wanted to go.
And you knew enough at age 7 that this probably wasn't what the culture would go, yeah, Maureen, that's exactly real life.
Yeah, right.
You knew enough to keep it.
I kept it inside my head.
That's interesting. So what told you that you needed to keep it inside your head, do you think?
Well, I don't think there was people, this was 1960s. Yeah. I mean, who talks about that stuff back then?
Yeah, good point. But then by age 10, you started to do what? You started to feel what kinds of capacities?
Well, actually, there was one situation where it seemed like there was like a lost soul hanging around me.
Yeah.
And I kept hearing all the words of this person, and I would see them there, and I thought, it really bothered me. I don't remember the details except for I remember our conversation. So I remember it was there for a while, and it would, it would almost like come in and out. Yeah. Because I think a lot of people have intuitive gifts and they don't really know, they don't understand how to practice or use them, and it's having somebody that has experience helping them, I think, is really valuable. Well, I remember a scary one that I had. I remember there was a friend of mine in high school, and my aunt would teach this. She called it, what did she call it? Psychometry, where you would like pick up an object and you would get information from the object about the person that was wearing it. Yeah. And I remember my friend, I didn't know it was her mom's at the time, but she handed me this jewelry of her mom's. And I remember picking up on it and I said, well, whoever this is has some kind of brain tumor or something wrong, And I didn't know, I was probably like 16 or something, and her mom got brain cancer. Oh my like God. A month later, she must have had it, because they discovered it. And I remember thinking, I don't want to know anything like that again. So that kind of thing was...
Did you shut it down then?
I did for a while because of that. That was not an experience that scared me. But then I opened it back up in my 20s. I realized, I can just ask for just stuff that's actually going to be helpful. It's like, maybe she needed to hear that because, it happened, my friend. Maybe she did, to realize that there was something to energy. But so now I always ask that the person's higher self, which is their spirit that never dies, gives me the information that's most helpful. I don't want to know anything that isn't going to help the person.
This was a gift that you've had all your life, and you didn't decide to use it right away for your business. I mean, you decided to go do something else. And your talents for intuition and healing, they just took a back seat.
Pretty much for a little while. I'd say probably the beginning half of the 1980s. They for sure did. I think I did that until almost around 86. 1986, I was in mortgage banking.
So what happened to shift you out of that, to move into something that suited you more?
Well, I liked the job, but I decided that really wasn't it, that I wasn't fully using my gifts. So then I went into my own healing. I started working on some things myself. Yeah. So I went into a major healing, you could say healing crisis, which usually is what brings people to change and do things differently.
Yes.
And so I found somebody who Clarice Davis, who's just a sweetie. She's, she retired many years ago, so now we're friends. But she used an approach for me where you would focus on your body and determine kind of where your issues were in your physical body. And then you would go in and almost like imagine you're inside yourself or just focus on that area. And by doing so, it's almost like you could move things out of your body, which would help you feel better.
And you were aware of what was moving. I mean, you had a sense of it, right?
Yes. It helped a lot.
Yeah.
Because just talking, because I tried some talk therapy and I thought this isn't helping much.
Yeah.
And so I thought, well, geez, I'd like to be able to take all the things that I've learned through my aunt, through Clarice showing me how this works so well, and then also for doing some other techniques that can help people let things go on a mental, emotional, and physical level. Just talking can, in some ways, it can even lock it back in if you're not doing something to move it out.
Yeah.
I think it's helpful to talk about things to move out of secrecy, because sometimes people feel that things are secret, but it's not helpful if it's not going to move it out of you. If you're just going to keep talking about it, it can, almost make it a part of your identity.
Yeah. Yeah. So you were your first client.
Oh, yes, I was.
And how did you do?
Well, I think I did okay.
So you were your first client, but then at some point during the 80s, right, you started to think like, oh, I could do this for more, or I had a more global thought? Or
Yes.
what was the progress?
Well, I figured that being human, that we all have things to work on.
Yeah.
They can be small things to big things. And so I decided that, that everybody needs to have somebody to help them through things, and that we need a new approach. Because like my grandma Sherman said, if you have too many problems, at least up until, like the 80s, you could end up in Anoka State Hospital. And I think that was the big threat that people had for years, where if you talked about things, people weren't going to like it, and they could put you in some place that isn't good for you, or they'll do electric shock, whether you need it or not. Another friend's grandmother ended up there for perimenopause.
Oh my
And
gosh.
I mean, it was a lot of different things. So I think my grandma, in her own way, was saying, don't talk about things too much.
Right.
And
Lock them in your body. See if you can, work it out as a disease or something.
For sure.
Yeah.
And I can see why they would have back then. So if somebody comes in and says, yeah, my parents didn't want to talk about anything, I always ask, what age, are they? And typically anybody who's like 70s and older, that's probably the case.
Yeah,
Where
that was
they,
my parents, for sure.
yeah, right. And so, so it's like, well, they didn't talk about things because it would have been a bad thing for them back then.
Right.
Like, we're lucky. We're in an era of great change. And I think there's been a lot more healing things that have come up over since the 2000s even.
Yeah.
So, and I had kind of an insight when I was in my 30s that really changed the way I think about working with people too, is I was having a meditation. There was somebody that was hard for me in my life. And when I was meditating, this person who's still alive, the higher self, came in, which is the spirit that never dies, but showed up looking like this person. And he said to me that I volunteered before we were born to be a lesson giver to you. And that you had many things that you wanted to work through in this lifetime, and because we're such close souls, I would make the most impact for you to play this role.
But he's a huge challenge in your life.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so, because I was mad at him before the meditation, and and then he said, a very small part of me is in this human body playing this role.
Yeah.
Most of me is off doing other great things in other times and places. So it was like, what?
You had never thought of that concept before.
No.
That someone was playing a role for you.
Yes,
Yeah.
I never thought about it, but that just changed my whole paradigm.
Yeah.
That, maybe, so now I believe that, there's no time and no space. Like, I think of the higher self as being like a pomegranate. And the pomegranate has all the seeds in it. And let's say the higher self has all these lifetimes that are represented by the seeds. And now sciences are showing, like quantum entanglement, quantum physics, and the Planck theory, that possibly that there could be something going on here of us, something connected to us, and then something billions of miles away, and we can still be affected by it. And so it tells us that likely we have perhaps many things going on all at the same time, and they're all affecting us. So that's kind of how I work now. It's like, okay, we all take turns being the lesson giver for each other.
Yeah.
Let's just give up the lesson giver roles in general, okay? Like, let's change the plan here. Let's change the way we do things here.
Yeah.
So if we've all played it, then there's no real judgment. Doesn't mean we have to hang out with somebody who's not good to us, but at the same time recognizing that it's a temporary role. They're not going to be playing that role forever. So that helps a lot to put it into perspective.
And they're actually doing you a favor.
That was a shock, but yes.
By making you upset enough to seek change, right?
Right, and it can be hard because if somebody's been abused, let's say they've been severely abused, to say, you wouldn't want to say say to them, oh, geez, well, that person was doing you a favor, but ultimately the planet is a very heavy place. So I've always tried to figure out, this is just my own analysis, like, why do we have such a difficult place here? What kind of came to me was that if we decided to have different experiences, let's say if your spirit, my spirit, everybody's spirit, if we took it all together and put it in one lump, that would be a oneness field. Or you can think of it as God or source. So all of our spirits together, including all living consciousness, all planets, all consciousness. And let's say we as a oneness field wanted to see what it was like to have all these different experiences from hate to love. Like, what's it like to have live in a frequency of hate? Yeah. What's it like to live in a frequency of love, and anything in between? Well, humans have been like, here, like 3 to 4. Yeah. So we're in a pretty low frequency. And so, we see that being in these lower frequencies, that we are going to have different challenges based on the frequency. Yeah. If people have brain challenges, the human body might be affected by certain lower frequencies and so forth. So I always figured that the people that are really the challenge, they're either likely, have a severe mental health issue, personality disorder, or maybe super duper traumatized, maybe even like programmed in some ways to do things. So not to excuse that, but at the same time, it's almost like it's a fine line, so. But I figured that kind of the goal that I've had for a long time now, and a lot of other people, is to come up with healing techniques to kind of move our mental, emotional, physical body above that lower frequency place. So let's say if we have 11 dimensions, 1 is hate, 11 is love, and we're 3 to 4. I think of 5. A lot of people are talking moving into 5D, which is fine. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. But I always think of 5 as being the birth canal into 6. So like even string theory has 11 strings, and 5 is like a no time, no space zone. So to me, it just kind of made sense that you're moving through 5 into 6. And if we can all realize we can let go of these roles, I hope that the contract for these roles is kind of wrapping up so that we can move everybody there, because we have to take the whole system with us. We can't do it alone. So this us against them thing does not work.
Yes. We can't really have the other present. We all have to be in this together. And that's interesting, because that has been on everybody's lips for this whole year. We're all in this together. We're getting the messaging. We're all in this together. And that's something that came to you pretty early on when you started working with energy, is that you wanted to expand and move into a more sense of moving in the global consciousness, seeing movement there and trying to support that.
And I figured that there's some things, like I've worked with people with some pretty severe trauma, for example. And, and at least when I first started working, and it's a lot better now, but it's not 100% there. People couldn't really talk about the trauma because people wouldn't want to believe it. Like if somebody had something happen to them, then they'd get blamed for it, for example. So my feeling is that you can't just stand up on a platform and say, okay, this is going on, let's stop it. Yeah. It's one person at a time. So like, if you get enough people healed from something, all of a sudden a critical mass shift occurs. Kind of like that 100th monkey, where you get enough people that are letting go of the lesson that they've chosen, which are typically collective lessons. And then all of a sudden things start shifting. So I always work with the person, like the current life, and I figure probably whatever's going on with anybody today is probably 20% of what the problem is or the issue, and that we also inherit all these ancestral things. And so I always look at, even now the sciences are saying that we probably are inheriting, let's say even 14 generations of the memories of our ancestors.
14 generations.
It was 7 for a while. Now they've switched to 14, so who knows? How that goes.
7 better.
So if grandma was having a hard time, and let's say she didn't work it through, which I'm sure she didn't because no one worked anything through, then we have it. We have the issue. So we need to clear it up for grandma, great grandma, Uncle Bert or whoever,
Well, tell me about that. Like, what kinds of things do people bring into this room? This is your healing room. So what kinds of things do people bring in, and what's the process like that they would expect in here?
Well, it can be a lot of different things. I work with anybody who, initially it was mostly people with trauma that I worked with, but that's not the case anymore. I do have a lot of that, but people come in to work through trauma, so that's one thing, and they'll want to move out of it and feel free, which is what you want. And then there's some people that will come in and let's say they started a business, or they have a business that they feel like they're blocked in some way from going to the next level, and so then we'll work on that. So there can be a variety of goals that, or they have relationship issues, whatever it is. Somebody died, a lot of different things like that. And so they'll come in and they'll tell me about, what they're going through, and I'll kind of write up their goals. And then since I've been younger, I've been able to see what's going on with the energy field. So in a sense, I've learned how to kind of change channels. So like, for example, if I'm talking to you and you're telling me what's going on, I can ask to change channels, so to speak, where I'm looking at the energy field, and I'll see things in the energy field that's going on around them. And if they talk about things, because we got so many things going on with us, the things that are most present for them to work on are showing up in the energy field. So I'll tell them what I'm seeing, and I always want people to go with their own gut on things, because it's, even though I feel like I try to be super clear, everybody's got a filter.
Yeah.
Nobody's 100%. So I'll tell them what I'm getting, and then I'll say, how does it resonate with you?
Yeah.
And then they can tell me how it does or doesn't resonate. So, and then I'll go through everything I'm seeing, and I'll write it down, and it shows almost like a roadmap of sorts. And then I've come up with a lot of healing protocols. I've got like 4 manuals of material that I teach, and now other people can teach them too, that I've actually gotten the information by looking at people's energy fields.
Wow.
And so if I see enough common themes, then I'll write down kind of how, and then I'll try working on it. Like, I'll be shown how to work with it, and if it works, then I write it down, and then I start making protocols out of them. So I figure, I don't want to have the information just for me, because I don't think that's the point. So I say I'm a good person to write things down. Like, I'm a good student to look at things and write things down.
Yeah. And I think it's cool that you don't hold it close to your vest. Like, this is mine. I'm going. You're very generous with the things that you understand and want to share to help make the world better.
Well, if I held on to it, nothing would happen. So I figure it would be a waste.
Yeah. But that's a 3D thing.
That's true.
That is what we've been living with, where if you have an idea, you got to keep it close so nobody else makes money off of it.
Yeah, that is the old thinking for sure. Yeah. It's that kind of patriarchal kind of thinking. And by the way, I think patriarchy isn't good for the men or the women. So It's not like a woman thing per se. I always say that women were hurt by patriarchy on a mental, physical level, and that's women. And then men were hurt by it on a spiritual and emotional level. Like, men can't cry. I remember telling my son, just cry about this, just let it out. And he's like, and I said, he goes, well, boys don't cry. And I said, well, that's a myth. And he goes, well, you're the only one that thinks that. He was probably 10 at the time.
But I'm seeing more of that now, though, so that's awesome. So we're going into balance more than we're going into one or the other.
Yeah, so the old thing is that, one person is, in charge of everybody. I mean, not to say that somebody shouldn't lead in certain ways, but at the same time, it's like loosely lead. You want to use everybody's gifts and talents. Thankfully, nobody has exactly the same gifts and talents. Everybody has a little different. Even if you have the same gift, it's going to be different.
Yeah.
So we need everybody.
Every gift. Yeah,
right.
Yeah. So tell me about Community for Higher Consciousness. How did that come to you, and why is that so important?
Well, I started it, I got the website communityforhigherconsciousness.com in a really funny way, because I really felt like, we need to get a community to move the message out there. And granted, the more communities that do this, the better, because one group isn't enough. We need a lot of groups doing similar things. And I know there are other groups too. So I went on and I saw communityforhigherconsciousness.com was for sale. So I grabbed it. And I grabbed a lot of the other ones that were connected to it. And then one of my friends said to me, yeah, I told her I got the website. She goes, oh, I had that one for 5 years and I just let it go.
Oh my gosh.
And I said, thanks for saving it for me.
That's exactly what happened, isn't it?
Yes.
Wow. So can you see can you see the energy of that? Like, she's just holding the space for you until you have the idea, then you can have the website? That's cool.
Yeah.
So why was that? What is higher consciousness, and why would you start a community for it?
Well, higher consciousness is, like we were talking about earlier, like if we're, let's say, in dimensions 1 through 4, which is the lower realms, where it's not a very happy kind of setup. Somebody's got to be the lesson giver, let's say and somebody's the hero or anything in between. Let's say that's the setup we've made here. And so a lot of it is frequency based. And so I thought, well, the more we need that critical mass shift to move out of that, and more people need to realize that we can change the setup. We don't need to stay with this us against them divisiveness. Why don't we just throw out both of those ideas and come up with something different, completely different, toss out the old map and come in and do a new vision. And so back in, I think I got the website in about 2010, and I had my son, who's an IT person, and his then girlfriend designed this website for me. And I thought, well, what am I going to do with it?
Yeah.
And so then I had a group of people do a 2012 event. So it was myself, and we had Henry Emmons, who's a psychiatrist. We had Kevin Harrington. We had Tim Culpert. So those were the men, and then we had 3 women. So myself, Michelle Ray, and Barb Stahl. So we did this big higher consciousness thing about moving out of the old and into the new, which would be, let's say, 6 plus, 6 dimension. That would, if we were to use a template. And then after that was done, and I thought, okay, what am I going to do? And I've been kind of looking at different communities that would do this, and I found this really, what would you say, kind of egoless, I think of as the group that's on there now. The people that they really want everybody to do well, and they're doing, their heart's in the right place. Everybody's each other's cheerleader, and everybody wants to get the message out. Everybody does these group meditations together. So I thought, well, I'd love to see, let's say the planet eventually got to that, and not to say it's going to be our group that's going to bring it there, but what if we're a part of that? Let's say our group, and then there's other groups that follow in different places. What would happen if we all decided to really be each other's cheerleader and move into something different? We'd have a whole different planet.
We would. And so that's the point, is to be everybody's it's a collaboration versus competition model.
Yes.
A little bit.
We all want each other to do well.
Yeah.
There's not a lack of people. I mean, sometimes you can even share clients, like, oh geez, such and such is better at this than me, or they need this or that or the other thing. I mean, nobody's going to be able to be the be-all for anybody or anything.
Yeah, and that used to be the model. It was like kind of a guru model and a scarcity model, like I have it, you can't have it, kind of a thing. And it feels like that's shifting now.
Yes.
And Community for Higher Consciousness is representing that shift.
Yeah, I think of us as a template.
Yeah.
Like hopefully we can be a part of that critical mass shift. That's our intention, and I think that we can be a part of it. And I know we have a really great community in Minneapolis, St. Paul of people that are into wanting things to change and be at a higher level. And I found other people in other parts of the world that are really interested in it too. I've worked some in Mexico. They've got a really beautiful group there that's working, so.
So overall, how are you feeling right now about the state of the world? Is this a time of hope?
I think it is. It doesn't seem like it right now, but whenever you feel the craziest, as my friend Clarice used to say, meaning that you just feel like everything's, up in the air and difficult and challenging, that's usually when the biggest breakthroughs come in. Yeah. So, you go from the unconscious where you don't even know there's a problem, and that's where we were for a long time, and now we're in the conscious, like, okay, we know what the problems are, and and then we're moving it up into the light is where we're headed right now.
And that's the macrocosm, but the microcosm is really that same thing happening within the individual.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. I think they go together. We are the microcosm of the macrocosm. So what's going on with me is going on with you, is going on with a lot of people. So we have a lot of similarities. We're affected by the collective.
Yeah. So tell me about the microcosm of the client who will sit in this room. Do you typically work with somebody who's just kind of, wading into the idea of energy and spirituality and quantum physics, or do you end up working more with people who have kind of done their own work for a while?
Well, it's a combination, and most people have some idea of what's going on when they come in. But every once in a while, somebody will be going through a really tough time, and they're just willing to try anything. Yeah. And sometimes you get somebody. There's this one guy. He's so funny. He used to come in and he'd say, "I don't know. Sometimes I think you're a little crazy. I don't know why I'm coming." And then one day he came in and he said, "I think I'm just as crazy as you now." So he was joking, but he was kind of serious for a while, I think. But I think sometimes people are looking for different answers, and they don't know what they think for a while. And we don't want anybody to think. I don't care if people think like me, honestly, at all. I use a template for healing that makes sense, and it works for healing. But I think we should all. I think part of this non-hierarchical thing is that as long as we're kind, and I know that's a big message for you. Yeah. As long as we're, wanting the best for people, if we're not going to think the same, that's okay. As long as we don't have bad intentions towards people, who cares if somebody thinks like me or not?
Yeah, yeah. And I'm going to do a little disclaimer here. I do work with you, and I adore you, and you are warm, and you are wise and intelligent, and you're comforting, and you are you only want the best for the person who sits in this room. So I'm really honored to be your friend.
Oh.
And is there anything you would like to add? I think we've kind of wrapped up our time, but if there's something that you want to, some way you want to button it down and.
Yes, well, I just say that we are our own best counselor. Sometimes we need other people to help us with it. Mm-hmm. And so I think that following our own wisdom, is good. And then I also, just one thing is I also have a lot of audios that I develop based on these healing techniques, so that people, because we're going through so much right now, that I thought, people could practically have a session every day, but who has the time or money for that?
Yes, yeah.
And so I've created all these audios, and they're set up like a healing process where people can play them. You don't even need to pay attention to the words, and they're set up for kind of automatically clearing your energy field.
Yes.
And so that's the one thing, is that people can find a way to do that. And again, they're healing templates. So a person, if you don't believe everything on there, it's more about just the concept behind it. People can look at things many different ways. So it's an option for people. And there's lots of options out there. So find a tool that works for you, whether it be like an audio, somebody's meditation class, a yoga class, a technique that works for you to feel better about yourself and move your happiness and love set point to a higher level.
Perfect.